Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode number 41. My guest, Jerry Sherk, former NFL's Defensive Player of the Year and 12-year veteran for the Cleveland Browns. Named to 4 Pro Bowls, Jerry was honored by the team in 2005 by being named a Cleveland Browns legend. Not only is Jerry commonly considered to be one of the best defensive players in football history, after not going out for football until his senior year in high school, Jerry was also a wrestler at Oklahoma State University. After retiring from the National Football League, Jerry went on to earn a master's in psychology, to research extensively the topic of athletic transition, and to be a national consultant for youth mentoring programs. Over the last 25 years, he has been the director of education and training for the California Mentoring Partnership. In speaking with him in the past and then preparing for this episode, I was blown away with Jerry's work off the field. He has tremendous expertise in the field of mentorship. He understands the difficulty athletes face when they move from sport to private life. He relentlessly pursues new knowledge and the opportunity to enhance lives around him. I'm extremely excited for him to share his story, more about his current endeavors, and his invaluable perspective. So with all that, let's get started. Jerry, thanks for coming on here.
Mark, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited about this.
You have such a unique story, as I mentioned in the intro. And before we dive into your football career and what you've done post NFL, could you share a little bit about your upbringing, where you're from originally, and what life looked like before football?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good place to start. So I was born and raised in a little town in Southern Oregon, Grants Pass. And it was about 8,000 people when I was born. And it was surrounded by, I was surrounded by nature. My dad was an outdoorsman. He was in construction. My mom was a school teacher, but really enjoyed, fishing and hunting around the hills and mountains around Grants Pass in Southern Oregon. And it was kind of an idyllic childhood. Got involved in sports down at the local park. We played every sport possible. We had a little park around the corner, a city park, and we played basketball, tennis, baseball, and football. And I particularly enjoyed football, but I think I saw myself more as just an athlete that actually didn't join organized sports for a long time. So I saw myself as just somebody that had fun playing football. And I felt I was too small to go out for the, organized football. So I didn't go out until I was a senior in high school. And once I had a growth spurt, there was a coach, Larry Stevens, who saw me walking around the halls the end of my junior year. And he came up and he put his finger in my chest and he went, "Sherk, you're going out for football." And I'd been thinking about it. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. So I did. And I had some success wrestling, and I think that helped me with football. So they put me on the defensive line. I believe I got honorable mention all conference, and I was kind of proud of that. But I think, maybe in that league, if you have a breath and a pulse, you might get honorable mention all conference. I didn't get any scholarships, and they were handing out scholarships for football quite readily in those days. So I didn't get any scholarships, but I was working for my dad. He was a plaster doing stucco. We were on the north end of town, and probably July, right after I graduated from high school, and I came down off the ladder carrying this hod, which is basically you're carrying plaster in a metal or cement in a metal container, and it's about 125 pounds. And I was getting some muscles by then. So I came down off the ladder, and there was this fellow at the bottom. He said, "My name is Jack Elway, and I'm the head football coach at Grays Harbor Junior College, and I want you to, come play for us." So it happened to be John Elway's dad, and
Wow.
probably John Elway might have been 2 years old at the time. So he was actually my first football coach. I went to Grace Harbor Junior College. My body was just starting to grow, and the muscles were just starting to come up all over me. So
Mm.
I went from I was actually, as a sophomore in high school, I was 148, and by the time I hit junior college, I was about 225 pounds. So I ended up at Grace Harbor. I had a mentor on the high school wrestling team during my junior year who was a really good wrestler, Terry Crenshaw, who ended up at Stanford, and he showed me how to wrestle with my legs. And
Mm.
I had the same build as he did. He was a state champion, and so he taught me how to the figure four and do all these things with my legs. So when I went into that wrestling league up in Washington, I pinned everybody.
Mm.
Um, and then going out for football, I didn't know if I was going to make it. I made first team, and first game I had a good game, and then I ended up making all conference on defense my freshman year, and then they put me on offense my sophomore year, and I made all conference my sophomore year on offense. And I didn't pin everybody my sophomore year. I pinned all but two guys, but that just kind of got the college's antennas up, the NCAA colleges, and I got a scholarship to Oklahoma State, where I went for a couple of years.
Mm. So I guess before we go into athletic transition, what you do as a profession, looking at your own transition from an early childhood, I think you're making faces light up for listeners who might be late bloomers or be frustrated with the current recruiting environment and process in and of itself. Could you share a little bit more on that transition from wrestling to football, and was it easy for you, and how'd you do it?
Um, I always worried about how I was going to do, and maybe that's part of success. People that worry and perseverate and seem to work harder. I felt that I was working harder than other people, but I can remember showing up at Grace Harbor uh, my freshman year, and they kind of put me in a dorm. And the first guy that I met was this guy named Jim Best. He was a sophomore football player, and he was a man's man. He kind of looked like, I don't know, Clint Walker, or even like a professional wrestler. He had that build, and I thought, oh my, I'm in the wrong place. I'm not going to make it. If this is the type of person that plays football in college, I don't think that I have a chance. And I saw some of the other guys too, and I felt kind of intimidated. But when I got on the field, I just noticed that I had agility and some of the strength, and maybe some of the smarts, and some of the guys that I thought were these tremendous physical specimens had a little bit of trouble putting one foot ahead of the other. And so I just kind of blossomed, and I was just lucky that the coaches were able to see something in me. We had pretty good coaches there in junior college, and I consider them mentors. They were at high school. I was not taught any technique on the defensive line. Just basically go that way or go that way. And when I got to junior college, the coaches were giving me keys like, if this guy fires out on you, you fight pressure with pressure. If they leave suddenly, the play will likely be in the direction that they go, but look in the opposite direction because it may be a trap, and so forth.
Mm.
But anyway, I was just surprised that I had so much success. I was more surprised than anybody else. It was in a way kind of like waking up for a dream, in a dream going, wait a minute, I'm starting in this junior college, on this junior college football team, and I'm wrestling and I pinned everybody and they're naming me captain of the team and all this stuff. So yeah, I would say for folks that aren't there yet, that there's always hope. And that's the only thing that we have going, is just try to keep pushing through and pushing through.
Mm,
And I've listened to some of your podcasts. They're very good, by the way.
thank you.
And I think I've heard several people, including you, talk about sort of analyzing what you do and looking at your weaknesses and trying to overcome them. And I think that that's what I've always been able to do, or when I was playing sports, is to be very analytical. Where am I strong? I'll improve my strengths, but I'll work harder on my weaknesses. And even for my weaknesses, sometimes those things remained weak, but it strengthened other parts of my game when I worked on my weaknesses, to the point of that was really the key, that I worked on a weakness and just became stronger in other areas. Attitude, that word again, perseverance. I'll never not pursue the ball carrier till they're on the ground or out of bounds, that sort of thing.
There's so much to unpack there. I think right from the beginning of your answer, an idea came to mind. I think it's from the movie Chasing Mavericks, that says, fear is healthy, panic is deadly. So I think just having a healthy dose of fear that you might not be able to do it, I think that's in line with the worry that you were talking about. I don't know who to give credit to, because I think I can give credit to this next idea to many people, but I'm pretty obsessive about it with me and my clients, family and friends, is working harder on yourself than anything else that you do. And I think there's a lot that will come from that, because in focusing on your individual personal development, you're not in control of so many outcomes exteriorly. But if you work hard on yourself, you can almost attract the success. And then the last thing that I would say, which blends with your first answer, has to do with the psychology term neuro-associative conditioning, that we're pushed by either one of two things, pain or pleasure, and that's it. And when in your first answer, I heard, maybe you didn't use it directly, but fun, it was free. There was a lot of growth and perhaps love there. There was a pleasure there that made you want to do it. And then by the time you were in high school and college, that worry came along, and the blend was like waves crashing together to take you to a whole nother level. One of the things that I really want to ask you, because in your first two answers, you named like several people. And that's really what this podcast is all about, is giving gratitude to those who have helped you get to where you are, right? It's not just about being great, but the gratefulness as well. And you're obviously that, right? You were bringing up Larry Stevens and Terry Crenshaw, your mother, your father, the Clint Walker-esque person. And I just want to ask you, if you can concise it down, who would you point to as most influential, as the one that was your lead mentor when you were a young boy or teenager?
Well, I think my folks were really great examples. They were hard workers. My dad's dad was a hard worker too, but he was an alcoholic. So my dad grew up in kind of a tumultuous, atmosphere, but he never drank, and he was a hard worker. So, and my mom was a school teacher. She was at one time, her family lived in Texas, and she was picking cotton, in the late 1920s during the Depression. So them, of course, but then there's one fellow, and his name is Dick Modzelewski. He passed on a few years ago. He and his big Polish name, so we called him Mo, M-O. And he played for the New York Giants. He played on their championship teams in the mid-1960s at the same exact position that I played, right defensive tackle. He played with Sam Huff and Rosie Greer and Andy Robustelli and, Frank Gifford and all those great players. And so he was my defensive line coach when I came in to the Browns. And he saw something in me right away. I actually was named a starter. I came in 1970. I was second round draft choice out of Oklahoma State. Um, I was named a starter, but even at that, I came in with that. You spoke about it before, Mark. The worry, like, I'm a second round draft choice. Am I going to be a washout? This is the dream's right in front of me, but I don't know if I can, capture the dream. So this is a little bit of a long story, but hopefully it could be interesting. My first game was the first Monday night game ever. And we played Joe Namath and the New York Jets in Cleveland Stadium. I was used to playing at Oklahoma State in front of 25,000 people. It was standing room only at 85,000 people in that cavernous Cleveland Stadium. I was playing Joe Namath, who was like the poster boy, for the NFL 2 years earlier. He had helped the AFC and the NFC come together because his team with the Jets beat the Baltimore Colts in a huge upset. And that many people think that caused the merger of the two leagues, that because they could see that the AFC was, or the AFL, actually it was AFL, was something to deal with. So here's Broadway Joe, and I'm in front of 85,000 people, and there was an announcer, which was his first game, very controversial, colorful Howard Cosell. So it was his first game, and I became what I think of as his first goat. He used to pick on people and go, this, and he wasn't a great analyst, but he was just he was actually a great announcer because people just loved to tune in to hear what controversy he was going to, stir up. So he or somebody interviewed Joe Namath before the game and asked Namath what they were going to do. And Namath said, and according to Cosell, he said, they're going to run at the rookie, Jerry Sherk, number 72 out of Oklahoma State. And I didn't know any of this. And I had a pretty rough game, but I also had some good plays. But anytime I had a bad play, or sometimes even when it wasn't, my responsibility, Cosell would go, well, there you have it. They're running right over Jerry. And we won the game. So I was really, really happy. And I couldn't wait to get the newspaper the next day. It hit the stoop probably at 5 a.m, and I opened it up, and Browns win first Monday night game. And then deep in a story, it said nightmare ends for Jerry Sherk. And I went, what? And I didn't even know that they were, Cosell was disparaging me for the entire game until I read that. And I went to practice the next day, and the owner, Art Modell, came. I knew I was in trouble. He came out to the field when I was standing next to the huddle, and he put his arm around me and he said, we support you in every way. And I went, oh my. And so anyway, and the question was about my mentor. So it was actually a couple years later, and he was very supportive then, but a couple years later, I was, it takes a while in the NFL for most people to kind of get it. And the light hadn't turned on for me. And I remember we played the Los Angeles Rams, the last game of the season, and we were flying home, and I cornered Mo on the plane. I said, I don't think I'm getting this. And he said, relax, kid. And he said, this is what I see in you. And he talked about my work ethic, my agility, my nose for the ball. And he said, sometimes it just takes about 3 years to get it. And he said, this is what I see for you. In a couple of years, you're going to be known as one of the best in the game, which was absolute news for me. I felt I was struggling. And it allowed me to relax, but at the same time, work very hard. And in part to, I had so much respect for him to try to make his prediction come true. And it did, to the point where, within a year or two, I was voted the outstanding defensive player on the team. And I was voted that 3 times and went to 4 Pro Bowls and actually even won an award as voted by the the offensive lineman of the league. They only had it for a couple of years, but it was called the Mack Truck Bulldog Award.
Nice.
So they voted me the the toughest defensive lineman to play against. And it was Mo. And there were times that, I could go on and on about what he did. My second game, which was after that first Monday night game, we played San Francisco in Kezar Stadium, and I was playing very poorly. And he took me out of the game for one play. And he said, Jerry, I want you to know that you're playing poorly and your backup could actually play better than you. But I am going to put you back in the game, because if I pull you now, I will break your confidence. And I know that eventually you will become an outstanding player, and it'll be good for the team. It may not be good for the team today, but it'll be good for the future. So, Mark, you've been involved in sports for so long. How many coaches would actually do something like that? It almost brings me to tears to think about it some, decades and decades later. So he had so much integrity and so much belief. And that's what a mentor does. They see something in you that you don't see in yourself.
I'll tell you what, as you were talking about it and then you finish it that way, that's what I was going to say is there's this idea, the Pygmalion effect, right? And it's this idea that our belief about others becomes the actions others take until that person starts to believe it themselves, and then they take higher action, because our belief system has a lot to do with the stories that we tell ourselves. And I just absolutely love the short little snippet of that story where he didn't totally crush you, right? Because in a lot of ways, he's teaching you a lesson, but he doesn't really crush your spirit. And I think the belief system of an athlete for sure, but definitely in performance is huge, and it's a fragile thing. And I think where I want to go with that is based upon when I was a young pro, I remember taking the locker right by the door because I felt it was a privilege and I had to earn my way back into the room. That's how I viewed it as well. You played for over a decade for one team. So I want to ask you how would you break up the chapters of your career as a Brown? Do you remember some years better than others, or is it all just one strand to you?
That's a good question. When I reviewed my career when I was studying athletic transition years later, I had the opportunity to just kind of think about the sets of years. And so in one way, it's almost kind of funny is that I felt that at first I was a target, and that all these helmets were, they were trying to block me, and they hit me really solid for about 3 years. And then the light bulb went on, and I could spend 5 minutes talking about how the light bulb went on, but I won't right now. At least for the next 4 to 5 years, I was no longer a target. They were the target, the ball carrier, the quarterback. And so instead of feeling these helmets, size me up and hit me solidly, they were missing me. I was getting around them, and I was putting my helmet on the ball carrier. So it was like, at first I was the firing range for the missiles. The second set of years, I was the missile. And then I had some injuries, and your body breaks down. And so for the last 3 years, I felt those helmets hitting me solidly again. And it was like, I think I will retire before somebody retires, before they look closely at the film and see that I'm not being as effective as I was. I think I'll retire before they retire me. So that was that's one way to look at it. Another way is I think I went into Cleveland and I was so innocent about life and about big cities and about big time sports. I guess a better word would just be naive. I was kind of like, there's a show that was on so many years ago, the Beverly Hillbillies, and they had Jethro Bodine. And I think I was just kind of a Jethro for a while, just going, hey, look at that skyscraper. And oh, you want me to get down there in the line and hit somebody? I'll give it I'll give it a try. And then I got a little more sophisticated. Well, actually, a couple of years ago, they had an anniversary of the first Monday Night Football game, and they played that first Monday night game on the channel. And so I was allowed to, it helped me to look at it objectively. And I thought about being in the moment, thinking that I felt I wasn't doing a very good job. But then as I looked at it objectively, I saw that team was a bunch of old guys who were just about to deteriorate, to leave the league. And I was really the only person that became a stalwart,
Mm.
on the field. So anyway, that kind of brings another aspect into it. But I felt like I was naive and not a very good football player. And then light bulb went on, and then I got it, and I became just somebody that my teammates would look up to. And then the third part was, even though I was continuing to try to play my best, the third part was just kind of me starting to separate from the game, seeing that, gee, my body is breaking down. I'm not having the success that I did, and maybe I should think about what I'm going to do next. And so it's kind of like going through maybe a breakup with a girlfriend when she's breaking up with you, and so you
Mm.
try to find some faults with her to make
Mm.
it easy to easier to break up with you. Like, these people don't really know who I am inside, and there's you you can make up stories about the greed of the people, and the false praise and all that kind of thing.
I remember being roughly in that 3 year window as well. There, had a great coach who has since passed, Coach Bernhardt, who talked about there's no greater compliment than being called a pro. And then years later, I have another character coach named Ben Ives who was sitting down with me at a coffee shop, and he was describing the difference in his mind between being a pro and a professional. And to him, he felt like being a professional, you needed the structure around you. You needed things to you needed to be told what to do, kind of like Mo did for you, kind
Yeah.
of like give you the answer sort of thing. And then once you get to that 3 4 year mark, maybe that's it, that threshold where it's harder to stay than become, right? A pro is you kind of build your own philosophy, and you have your own way of going about things and staying on top of your ones and twos. The question feeds right into what I have for you is, I could tell from your intuition and you have such a philosophical mind, whether you're describing it in metaphor, whether it's the light bulb or the missile. I want to ask you, you eventually got into studying psychology after the NFL, but was it something you were really interested during your time as a pro athlete or even before then? Like, what got you into psychology? Because if you were using it during your time, you're probably weaponizing it to the best of your ability.
I think I had a lot of intuition on the field, and I was able to read people. And I eventually, at first you just have to do what you're told, and then after a while you develop your own style, and you develop your own style because you can see so much more. You begin to be like a radar sweeping, the entire field and the sidelines and the scoreboard and everything. But I didn't really think about psychology back then. I did start doing a lot of reading. It was the end of the 60s, the start of the 70s. So it was Vietnam War, and there was a lot going on in society. And after I actually had to join the National Guard to keep from going to Vietnam. And
Hmm.
when that was after my first year. And so after I got out, I just felt like I didn't know anything, didn't know what was going on in the world. I just had my nose down trying to be this football player. So I started reading all kinds of books, but not psychology. It's more like Herman Hesse and Jack Kerouac and Baba Ram Dass, and all these different thinkers and authors. And I didn't really think about doing psychology until kind of the transition hit me. And that was about 7 or 8 or 10 years out, when I felt like life was nowhere near the same that it was. I had a good life. I was married, had a couple of kids, living in a beautiful place, but there was no more 85,000 people screaming. There was no more adrenaline. There was no more, being in the zone. And so I went back to school I had been a photographer, which is a whole nother kind of chapter in my life. And I had a freelance business, and I just kind of got tired of it. It just wasn't challenging for me. So I decided to go back to school. I said, I like people, I like ideas. I want to find out what's going on inside of me. So maybe I'll go back to school and try to get a master's in psychology. And that's what prompted me to go back.
Outstanding. I really want to pull on the thread of what you said. Life is nowhere near what it was before me, because I feel whether it's now or in the future, people are feeling that or will be feeling that. So one of the topics that I've learned a great deal about from our first initial conversation during one of my grad courses, and then through our mutual friend, Dr. Christina Versari, is athletic and career transition. So for listeners that are new to the topic, perhaps you could go more fundamental and rudimentary about it. Could you explain what it is, and then why is it so important to you, and what it's like for these big time athletes and those that are perhaps in military or full-time parents going from their profession to private life?
Well, yeah, so I'll jump off. And when I went back to school, I did run into Dr. Vasari. She was one of the first professors I connected with, and she told me that there was a whole body of work. I mean, she had an interest in psychology. She was a psychologist for the Brazilian, Olympic basketball team, and so that we made a connection on that basis. And she said there's a whole body of work called athletic transition in sports psychology. And I was like, huh? I was like Marmaduke the dog. What? And so that excited me, and I started reading about it, and there were some really good things in there. But what I found after surveying a lot of the studies, a lot of PhDs were studying different aspects of the transition, was that there was nothing that resonated with my athlete's heart. I still had that athlete's heart. I knew what it was like to be an athlete. And there was kind of like no story, no narrative. It was this piece and career, focus on career or gerontology or this and that and the other. And I went to Dr. Vasari, and I mentioned that, and she said, exactly. She said, there's nothing that really resonates with athletes. And then talking to her about 2 months ago, and this is, 20 years later from that first conversation, she said, there still is nothing. So I wanted to find it for myself, at least. And I thought, well, I still have a lot of space in this brain. When I was playing football, and it's kind of a joke that I told myself when I was trying to depart from the game and distance myself from the game, I said, I still have a lot of space in this brain, because I've learned to go left, right, straight ahead, and hopefully not backwards. So when I started studying athletic transition, I thought, well, psychology is about models like 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous, and maybe I can create a model for transition that would resonate with athletes, because I still have this athlete's heart, and I know what I had, and I know what I'm missing. And so I just kind of jumped off for myself, and I found some really good keys. And one was the hero's journey, which is
Joseph Campbell.
It's Joseph Campbell. He analyzed mythologies, religions, fairy tales, and stories, and he basically said that it's all the same story, that and that you can follow others' footsteps. And that really, that light bulb went on there. How to do something great in life has been done before, through all these stories. So what he said is you follow in the footsteps of all these people. So he broke it down into about 17 tasks or stages. And I simplified it for myself, just for my own use and working with a few other athletes. But the first thing is, for any story, you have to have a calling. So our calling, of course, our big first calling, your calling, my calling, Mark, was in sports. I want to be the best. I want to be the best lacrosse player that there ever was. I want to be the best football player. And then Campbell had different terminology. He had refusal of the call, which is like if you start anything big, there's going to be fears coming up. And so, for me, it was like, well, Jim Vest looks like a caveman. And I'm this little kid from Oregon that I don't even have hair on my body. In the NFL, these guys are 275 pounds and eat raw meat with gunpowder for breakfast, I believe. So how am I going to do that? So anytime you want to jump into something big, there's got to be some fears, because it's not easy. And then just incredibly, I've been in the mentoring world for 25 years also. One of the stages is the meeting with the mentor. And so I kind of simplified it for myself, and I went more like it's the calling. You have to have a calling. Then there's the refusal or fear of the call, meeting with the mentor. There's crossing the threshold. So what you're trying to do in the big picture, and Campbell puts it so nicely, so explicitly, you're going from an ordinary world to a special world. That's your goal, to be in the special world. So the special world for me was, being in Cleveland Stadium, taking the ball carrier down and just going, I don't even know how I got here. There's something working in me that got me to this ball carrier, and it's not my responsibility, but dang, this is good. So that's the special world. And in the special world, there are tests. And the tests are so many. The test for athletes can actually be the contest. Practice is also a test, because you have to perform there. And then the tests that we all have, the developing relationships with significant others, with coaches. The public speaking was huge for me. I had a huge fear. It was a huge sort of a roadblock for me, back in those days. And we all have fears. There's so many of us, even when we're successful, we have the imposter syndrome. What would they really think if they knew what was going on in my head?
Sure. Yeah.
That sort of thing. So anyway, that really, the hero's journey helped me, because what I realized is that I could follow not only in others' footsteps, Mark, but I could follow in my own footsteps, because I'd already gone around that circle once. So just knowing that the most important thing is you got to have a calling, and it may, the calling that you choose at first may not be the calling that you end up with, and that's okay. That there's going to be fear, that you have to find people in your area that know something about the area, that you can develop a relationship that will believe in you and see those things in you that you don't see in yourself. That there will be a threshold, that there'll be a moment of, I'm not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Sure. And that's walking into Cleveland Stadium with 85,000 people and facing Joe Namath with Howard Cosell, telling people what a terrible ball player you are. That's crossing a threshold. And then for me, I changed Campbell's model a little bit to put practice in, because we as athletes really understand that doing something good or great is about practice. And then as far as the transition, the last stage for Campbell, and I also added to mine, is the return. You go from a special world, that special world of competition, back into an ordinary world. And you have to go. If you try to stay there, then you're requiring people to see you in a light that you really no longer are,
Mm.
that you're this great athlete. You're not. You used to be a good athlete or a great athlete, but now you've got bad knees. You're old. Your muscles are not as strong. So you need to go back into that ordinary world and leave that other world behind before you can choose another calling. And so that's kind of what I hit on. And I also, at the same time, three things came to me. One was about this return. So I realized that the first task is to let go. The second task, I mean, we could talk about letting go for hours and hours and
Hours,
hours.
hours.
Because there's so many, as you build yourself into an athlete, you even take on these characteristics that some of them don't transfer back into real life. You have to think that you're special. And if you go back into the ordinary world going, oh, I'm special, people should treat me in this certain way, then you're in trouble. But anyway, so the three big things that came to me that I needed to do was to let go. Two is to master something else. Because and I think about NFL ball players today, and some of the contracts are $10 million a year. Some the highest paid are $40 million a year. And if athletes think that cushion is going to carry them, well, it's great to have that money. But basically, what I found is that we are warriors. And if we go into life sitting on the couch with the channel changer, we're warriors without a war, and we're not happy. So I think that we are people that feel like we have to do something else. We're young enough coming out of whatever sport, sometimes 25 years old to basically 35 years old. You've got a lifetime ahead of you. And I don't think guys and gals are going to be happy till they master something else. And then the third thing is, and it goes along with what I've learned about human development and what's common sense, is that it's good to find a way to give back so that it's not all about you and how people view you and what you can do. But just like life is, a grandparent focuses on their grandchildren. They're not 80 years old going, well, I got to be the best this and the best that. There's a stage in life where you kind of let go and go, okay, I got mine, and maybe I didn't get enough, but I'm going to focus on something else. So it's good to even think about that early. You don't have to be 80 years old to do that. And I'll shut up here in a minute, but one theorist that I came across that I'm really still entranced with is a German-American psychologist named Erik Erikson, who created something called the 8 stages of life. And the last 2 stages are generativity. He even coined the word generativity. So generativity means care for the next generation. The last one is actually integrity. And there's always kind of a versus. So it's generativity versus stagnation, or being bitter and non-giving. Generativity just means the ability to give. And then the last stage is integrity, that you kind of go out of this life not freaked out about going out, but you kind of put the pieces together and go, I lived a life, and I'm not going to panic here, and I'm going to be a good example for younger people, and I'm still going to care for others. So anyway,
I love
that's
it.
my story. I'm sticking to it.
It's phenomenal. I didn't want to jump in at all, and I'm going to do my very best to unpack it. One of my really good friends that I went to college with, we bond over this song. It's called "Good to Go," and obviously It's a country song, but the idea is you live your life in such a way that you're good to go right now. And I think
Oh, I love that.
it's a good
I love.
reminder. As I was writing some notes as you were sharing your summation of the hero's journey, let go, master something else, and then give back. Something that I watch pretty often, I would say at least a couple times a year, is this documentary. It's called Chasing Great, and it's about a captain, Richie McCaw from the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team. And I think the opening phrase of the movie is part of me craves the pressure, and part of me knows that one day it'd be nice not to have it. And I really think there's that kind of dichotomy of everything you were talking about in that answer of autonomy and mastery, and then contribution to others. And there was probably a lot more yin and yang inside of your answer. Another one that I wrote down was a term coined by Nietzsche in psychology. In order to become a master, you first have to be willing to be a fool. And I think that has to do with your public speaking. You have to be able to put yourself out there and really want something and be courageous, do it afraid, amidst the fear. And then one of the last things that I wrote down next to the word calling that you brought up a couple times was inner voice or inner signal. And in order to get that, you got to go to a place that's away from the outside noise. This inner signal of your life becomes greater, and you can hear that calling a little bit more the less you listen to the outside noise, or at least that's my perspective, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. So I'm going to ask you a question more personal to you. Sure. Kind of like a what do you know now that you wish you knew then? I guess as you were going through that retirement, and we'll call it a transition away from the NFL, could you take us inside of that? Whatever you're willing to share, whether it was there was easy parts or really difficult parts. I think it would be a pretty visceral experience for listeners to hear kind of how that was for you.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that comes to mind when you say that is, going back to my photography career, I'd actually started apprenticing a really good photographer late in my career when I had some injuries. And so by the time I got out of football, I was a decent photographer, not a great photographer, but I could get a job with the newspaper, magazines, and so on and so forth. And so I came back to California. I have a place near San Diego, near the ocean here. And I worked some in San Diego for Associated Press, is what they call a stringer. You know, whenever they need somebody to take photos of an event, I would show up and was happy to do it. So that allowed me to actually go down and shoot some San Diego Charger football games. So that allowed me to be close to the game and still see that, yeah, I used to kind of, 2 years ago or a year ago, I was here and it still exists, and I wasn't dreaming about it. But there was one game, and it was probably maybe 2 or 3 years after I retired, and I was working alongside of maybe a 25-year-old young person, your sideline photographer with a big lens. Back then, it was not digital. You actually had to, we called it souping your film up. You had to develop your film. They had a dark room in Qualcomm Stadium. Back then, it was Jack Murphy Stadium, but they had a dark room for Associated Press where we worked. So after the game, we went back and we were souping up our pictures, and then just kind of like in the movies, under the red light, the picture starts to come up. So this young man had shot a picture of the guy sacking the quarterback. And he was so excited, this 25, 26-year-old young man. He's like, look at this. And I was kind of looking at that. And I said, yeah, that's great. In my mind, I was going, you think that's great? 3 years ago, I was the guy flying through the air, about to hit the quarterback blindside and separate him for the ball. And so, it just gave me an image of like, this guy's excited about taking the picture. I'm kind of liking photography, but boy, it's nothing like launching yourself in the middle of the air in Cleveland Stadium in front of 85,000 people and hitting Terry Bradshaw. There's nothing that compares. So there was that. And then just a quick snippet, and it could have even been before that. I had about I bought an acre of land, a little redwood house. It was about 2 blocks from the ocean. I remember my first few months out when the season was going, could have been October. I went down the mailbox. I think I just had a pair of shorts on, no shirt, no shoes. California, man. Uh, and I reached into the mailbox and I looked up I had some palm trees down the front of my property. And I thought, man, this is really nice. It's quiet. It's beautiful. It's blue. It's quiet. And then it just kept going. It's quiet. It's quiet. It's always going to be quiet. There's never a time where it's not going to be quiet. And it just started making me realize that this is my life. And now it's quiet. It's really quiet. There's no commotion. There are no fans. There's no adrenaline. There's no event. There's no happening. So that was kind of really the start of like, wow, what am I in for? And then to kind of sum up those first few years, I did okay in photography, but it wasn't a passion for me. And then I eventually went, okay, what am I doing? And what was I participating in the NFL? Why is life so different? I got to figure myself out.
I think many people can relate to that is what I would say. And when it comes to utilizing anything from your pro athletic career, what would you say you were able to bring as you went into mentorship and what you do now as a consultant?
I'm really glad you asked that question, Mark. Because as you can tell, I'm a guy that thinks about these kinds of things. So I thought, what were the lessons that I learned? What were the life lessons, And there were so many of them. And one was, try to find your passion, try to find something that you're never going to be in the zone, like playing in front of 85,000 people and hitting Terry Bradshaw, but you want to try to move towards the zone in something. And so there was that. I almost talked about it earlier when you talked about, the light bulb going on. And so for me, it happened in Cleveland Stadium when I was in the middle of a game, and I'd always done what the coaches told me, but then I had started to guess and I started to have success. And there was one play that I missed my area because I guessed and it was wrong, but I did that so infrequently that I know the coaches were still like, well, this guy's tearing it up. And so right in the middle of the game, the ball carrier went for 12 yards over my territory. And I went, oh, films Monday. They're going to, and then all at once, something inside of me went, F it. I know better than they do what I should be doing. My game changed from that moment on. So, that was a lesson of, you kind of just do the right thing, do what people tell you to do. And then at some point, if you work at it hard enough, you're going to be able to develop your own style. You're going to be able to break the rules and create something of yourself. So that's a whole nother lesson for me. Another lesson, I mentioned it earlier, is work at what you're weak at. Because even if you don't get better at that or measurably better, it's going to lift the other parts of your game or your career. Another thing is practice. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours. So it does take somewhere, 5 or 10,000 hours to really get good at something and to move towards mastery. So just a lot of things I've been able to take with me, just the simple things in football players, where, the Jethro Bodine part of me says, when you're knocked down, get up. You're knocked down, get up. When you're knocked down, get up. And things like what the worst thing that happens to you and is the most painful to you can turn out to be the best thing for you. Just taking my transition from sports, it felt really bad. I actually went through a divorce at that time, and left the city and didn't have the income that I had, no notoriety, or that just kind of faded away. My body had broken down. Um, all these stressors hit me, and it created a wound. But in going into psychology and healing the wound, I've been able to create a life. So it's like the worst thing that felt like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be the best thing.
Yeah, I think one of my mentors, first in psychology, Dr. Rob Gilbert, says often he's tremendously into storytelling. And he says there's no such thing as a great story without a great problem. And I think that's so true. And what I remember when he was helping me become a better speaker in front of groups, and I was done sweating through shirts and being nervous in front of a group, he said, don't ever or very infrequently talk about your success, like the all conference thing that you brought up, because not everybody in that group can relate to your all conference, but they can relate to your setback. They can relate to the pain that you went through. I mean, that's something every human being goes through, and show them the response from that pain and how you work through it. And I think that made me a better speaker. I wanted to share something about the first thing you said about coming up with your own style over time. I was really blown away. I was listening to this podcast while I was on a plane, and then the athlete that was in it was Carissa Moore, who won gold in surfing for USA. And she was describing her final run, right? It's just her and one other female athlete in surfing for gold. And I was just absolutely blown away by this, Jerry. She was just talking about she's not in control of the wave, right? So she can't be too tense out there. She decided to take herself back to when she was a young girl and having a lot of fun and surfing and learning with her dad. And I came up with this whole transitive property that the more grateful you are, which is what she chose to be in that gold medal run, the more present you can become, because gratitude strips away every feeling of negative emotion. And then the more present you are, because that's where peak performance is expressed, the more free you can become. So when you said F it or forget it earlier about that play where you let it go for 12 yards, and flipping that mindset into, well, I can do it my way, right? And look where I am, right? I'm out here at Cleveland Stadium, and I even have the opportunity to mess up, right? And by choosing gratitude, it relieves you of all that negative emotion, gets you more present, and helps you become more free. And I like to share that, because if you can find a way to instill optimism and gratitude as you put it, launch yourself into letting go of whatever you did past and mastering something new, I think that's going to be really great for anybody looking to transition. Is this true that someone told me you might be publishing a book or already published a book? Is that happening?
I published a lot of little pieces in mentoring, mostly workbooks, but I'm working on a book right now, and even talking to you helps me think about the content. But the tentative title is The Athlete's Second Journey, and I'm just kind of doing it on myself, on my own, and I don't have editors yet or anything like that, and I just kind of keep plugging away, and I've got kind of 4 sections, and I keep working on it. So hopefully I'll publish something. If it doesn't go out to the public, maybe I'll have a really good story to give to my kids.
No, absolutely. And so hopefully this podcast gives you a little bit of juice in that direction. Athlete's Second Journey really makes me think of, I believe it's a poem, To the Athlete Dying Young, right? And I think there's very few careers out there, although I shouldn't say few, maybe several, which you die twice, right? Where it's the athlete or the parent or military or otherwise, where you kind of have to, as Joseph Campbell would put it, that death and rebirth, and really build yourself back. I guess to wrap up our conversation about athletic transition, I want to ask you a pretty short and straightforward question that might not have a simple answer, but why is transition so difficult in your opinion?
Well, transition is difficult because it's change, and I think another word for transition is probably loss. We're feeling a lot of losses, and you can call them stressors or whatever, but it's for athletic transition, it's the life that we thought we had no longer exists. And so to start another life, and there's some folks that, and this is great if if you go into coaching or you're a sports agent or um, something else related to sports, you can bring more of that. Maybe you don't have to do your 10,000 hours, but I think the transition in a way is, you talk about grace, that there's also some beauty in it, even though there's chaos. There's beauty in, and you talk about dying really to your ego so young. It gives you such a great preview of what's going to happen when you're 70, 80, 90 years old. And in a way, when I write about it, trying to write this book, it's in a way it's a gift. It's a gift that we have to go through this. And then there's a phrase that it's kind of shocking when you hear it, and then to me it's kind of beautiful too. And I read it as I was reading men's studies, but it doesn't have to be solely about men. There's a lot of women athletes out there too, and it has to do with the hero. And I read it in two different books. I don't even remember the books, but the question is, what do you do when you're done being a hero? And the answer is you die. Because you die to that herohood. You go on, you have to let that go and go on to something else. So to me, there's some beauty in it, a little bit of ugliness if you don't let it die, or if you can't let it die. Those are the people that get stuck or do like a lot of drugs because they can't, God bless them, they can't stand the pain. But if you die to it, then you can then create another life. Another way of thinking about it is, even in the mythological stories, when people took their journey, like Odysseus, and they were gone for 12 or 20 years and they came back as, older men, what do they do when they come back? They tell stories. And that's part of being a mentor. That's part of dying to, you're not going to go out there and fight that battle again, but you're going to talk to somebody younger that wants to get on that ship and go climb up inside the Trojan horse, or fight the guy with one eye in the middle of the forehead. So so getting back to your question, it's hard because in some parts of it, and it's not all good, but as an athlete, there are parts of it where life is beautiful. And some of that's being taken away. I listened to your podcast with, is it Lyle?
Yes.
And he talked about playing lacrosse as a young man and dipping his stick into the water and becoming part of nature. And that was so beautiful. And what if he didn't have that anymore? He can probably still do that. A football player, is going to be hard for a football player to get on the football field, but there are parts of being an athlete that are so beautiful that they're hard to let go.
Yeah. I would say, which part, the NFL player or your career afterwards, has been more fulfilling for you as you reflect?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that before. I think they've both been fulfilling in different ways, and in some ways there isn't a separation, because what I've done has been related to what I did. So, and I can remember I was sitting in an office waiting to have a meeting. This is probably 25 years ago, when I was first starting to study athletic transition. And I picked up a magazine, and it was there's a story about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I wish I could find where he said this in his exact words, but they were asking the question about maybe lamenting his retirement or whatever. And he said, everything I've ever done, I've brought forth inside of me to this day. So there's
Mm,
nothing that I've done that's ever been lost. So
mm.
that was pretty inspirational. And that's, that's where you can be mentored sitting in an office reading a magazine and having Kareem Abdul-Jabbar say something like that. Nothing is ever lost. And I
Love
believe
that.
that. Yeah.
I love that. I want to be conscious of your time, so I only have a few more questions.
Sure.
When you are speaking to the mentees, the individuals, the groups, or the teams about what you deem most important, what would be a phrase or a message you find yourself repeating the most that you believe is critical that you want to leave them with?
Just, every group is different. Every individual is different. It's just kind of where they are in life. If it's a young athlete, or a group of young athletes, kind of some common sense is, find out what other people are doing as far as their workouts, and work out harder.
Mm,
But be smarter too. Don't work yourself to death. Um, just the messages can be different. Like I'm gonna speak to a Kiwanis group, a service organization tomorrow, and I'll probably focus a lot on generativity, and I'll
mm,
congratulate them for the caring and giving that they're doing as a service club. And then sometimes I don't get it right. I mean, years ago I was really steeped into athletic transition and really just kind of going through the nuts and the bolts of it. And I spoke to a group of current athletes at San Diego State, and they had some, they were in some mandatory class for athletes. I forget what it was, but I spoke on the transition, and it was crickets, because they were trained to get to the mountain, and I was telling them how to come off the mountain. So
mm.
my speech kind of crashed, or at least they looked at me with the 100-yard stare. So
Mm.
sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't.
Right. And I just think it's so necessary for whether someone needs to hear this type of podcast right now, or share it to a friend that they can think of that's going through that experience. I think timing, it definitely does play a big part. Something that I set up to kind of take us home was more of a speed round in which I was going to ask you a group of
Okay,
questions that I
sure.
wanted you to answer or complete as quickly or as fast as you would like. And
Sure.
the first one would be, what is your favorite thing to do?
My favorite thing to do, maybe a couple things. One is read, you know, um, read good books, and I like walking up hills to keep in shape.
I love that. I think more people should be carrying a weight uphill. I love that. Is there a book you would recommend while you say that?
Let's see. Some of the books that I've been reading lately just kind of go too deeply into the weeds about generativity. But you know what? I like Stephen Pressfield's books. Are you familiar with him?
I believe so. Did he write Gates of Fire?
He may have written Gates of Fire, although I haven't read it. His big breakthrough as a screenwriter was the story of Bagger Vance.
Okay.
But he's a fellow that encourages people that are trying to perform as athletes, mostly artists and writers. So he's got a book called The War of Art. He's got a
Hmm.
book called Becoming Pro. So anytime I feel like I'm in a stagnant place, I'll put part of one of his books on, and he's basically saying, get up off your ass. And he's always talks about fighting resistance. He said the resistance is the enemy.
Hmm. I really like that. Yeah, I really, really, really like that. Who was your favorite teammate to play with and why?
Uh, I've got three in mind, but I better pare it down to one. I'm going to go with Brian Sipe. So Brian Sipe was a quarterback out of San Diego State. I started with the Browns in 70. He came in in 72 as a 13th round draft choice. They don't even have 13 rounds. I think they have 7 rounds now. He spent time on the taxi squad. He didn't know if he wanted to be there. He just had incredible intelligence and intuition, and sat in the meetings, and just going through his mind was, why didn't the quarterback, do this or that? And we still keep in touch. Our wives are best friends, but he went on to just have a stellar career and was named the most valuable player in the NFL in 1980, and set all kinds of records for Cleveland. And he's my favorite because we're still buddies, and we go hiking out in the desert, and we get to talk about the old days. Remember when when nobody would refuse a meeting with us? we were so famous that we didn't have to show IDs when we were back in the days of cashing checks, or we never had to pick up a tab in a restaurant. Yeah. Brian Sy, he's an incredible guy.
It feeds right into my next one. When you think of football, you think of what?
I think of being in the middle of Cleveland Stadium with people roaring so loud that it comes up from the earth into your body and vibrates. And that's what that's what happened. It didn't happen all the time, but when that crowd got fired up and a big game, it was just like, where is this sound vibration coming from? It's coming in all directions.
Amazing. Finish this next sentence. It all comes down to the story that you make about it. One thing I've learned in psychology, and doing this work for many years, is that the world exists out there, and then we make a story about it. And so it's good to make a story that's useful for yourself, because you can make some bad stories out of the same thing that you can make a good story. It's kind of the falling down is good for you type of a story. Yeah, Dr. Rosari has always said, if you're going to make something up that supports you. And right. I agree with that. If you were to meet a famous figure from your past, or from the past, that you never met, but would have loved to, who would that be? And what would you ask him or her?
Oh, that's a good one. Years ago, when I was studying psychology, I studied a lot of Jungian psychology. So there's a psychologist named Carl Jung, and he was just fascinating to me. And so if I had one question to ask him, I would ask him about his theory of the personality, or the theory. He kind of bases part of his theory on opposites. So I would ask him more about his psychological theories. Fascinating guy. He had a saying about how to round out your personality, and I think this of athletes. He said, "Go to where you are not." And that will help complete. And then when you get there and you complete that part of it, go to where you're not again. And that's part of the focus on your weaknesses too.
Incorporating your shadow. Is that what he called it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last one that I ask every guest is, how would you define greatness?
Greatness to me is the ability to perform on a high level while at the same time not believing you're performing at a high level.
Oh,
for some reason I want to say that, because I think that's where people can get stuck. If you perform at a high level and think that you're all of that, then speaking of the shadow, you're waiting for a fall.
Yeah, one of the definitions that I have written down next to my desk is humility, and that is what you don't know is more important than what you do know. And I think that resonates with you, because when I asked you before this, what do you love most? And you said you love learning new things and new knowledge and being of help to others. Jerry, you are such a bright light. I'm so excited that we had a chance to do this. I would ask you if a listener wants to connect with you or find out more about the work that you're doing, where should they go?
Let's see. I could just give my email, which is Jerry, Jerry, M as in man, Sherk, Sherk @gmail.com. I'm also part of the California Mentoring Partnership. So if you forget that, you can just Google California Mentoring Partnership, and when you find the personnel, I'll be there with an email. And yeah, would like to hear from folks, and I'm proud of you and what you're doing, and I'd like to turn this podcast around for another hour and ask you about your experiences on the field, and then what you're doing, with training and performance. But I know we don't have time.
Well, I appreciate that, Jerry. I'm sure we will find the time to speak for hours on end. So I appreciate our relationship, and I know it's going to flourish from here.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on.